Well, the video we have for you today is quite dire. Imagine the most incredibly brutal way to die imaginable. Now, there's many ways for this, but in my opinion, many don't rank around the level of the Brazen Bull, the historic Greek torture death. That would just be so fucking incredibly horrific, it's not even funny. The Bull of Phalaris famously claimed its inventor, but I mean, I'd imagine perfectly that over a massive period of time that, uh, yeah, many people in ancient Greece were sent to this horrific death. It starts to get even worse when you consider that the different size and dimensions, and on many accounts, whether or not the person being executed was tied up or just free to kind of be inside this brass object really goes to show how horrible it would be. Either tied up or freely, you would still just start burning very quickly and just like freaking out, sizzling of your flesh, the trapment of being inside metal, the heat and exhaustion you would face. It would just be fucking horrific. This was a society of people that was built upon very strong beliefs and values. So for someone to be instructed to this, it must have sent shiver down enough people's spines for them to say, "Hey, this could actually work." And I would imagine that anybody witnessing the Brazen Bull probably wouldn't commit any of what the punishment was for. And who could forget the feint of Saint Eustace, where he was originally meant to be thrown in with a den of lions, but the lions didn't do anything to them. So Eustace and his family were put into a brazen bull, and that's a fate that is just hard to even speak about. But perhaps the most important fact of the Brazen Bull was the fact that there was special tubing put within the device to make it sound like a bull is roaring, or and it's really the screams and terror of the person within it. Now that is an interesting note because that's almost like being consumed by something, being consumed by rage almost. The the subject is destroyed completely by the rage of his captors. And without modern internet or really medical care of any kind, people didn't live that long anyway. So death was always on everyone's mind. And to see something so horrific happen must have just sheltered the population into a submissive state. And that's really what the idea in general of these horrific torture devices. Today we have a very structured society, but back then they needed to keep the population under control, or it could mean the rulers' lives. Now, going back to the Brazen Bull itself, there's certainly more prolonged ways of dying. I mean, you would be in horrific pain and probably quickly either pass out or just fucking start thrashing around until you eventually went unconscious. But the mere fact of entrapment, of heat, of exhaustion, of helplessness is really something that'd be unfathomable to die. And there's literally got to be a billion different ways you would rather go than this entrapped, horrific, helpless, just completely frightening and bad way to end your life. So be glad that probably nobody has been brazen bold for a very long time, although I imagine there's some pretty dark corners of modern world that anything is possible. But in general, this was a regular part of their society back then and a part of their culture. So, I mean, your chances of getting it back then would be astronomically higher than living in today's world where sure there's bad things that occur in today's world, but it's not as vocal as it was in history. Whereas in history there was lots of turmoil and strife and violence in many aspects. But I mean, generally today, you know, your chances of getting brazen bold, for anybody watching this, ain't high. And that really brings us to the conclusion of just, I mean, this aspect of life itself. I mean, there's really nothing more frightening than the moments leading up to this event for the person who's being subjected to it. But as part of the culture back then to really kind of grasp at the extremes, you know, the war they had, the turmoil, the strife, the horrible tortures and persecutions they had back then kind of formed into generally into today's society of leniency and forgiveness. So an important thing to take from all this is if you're having a bad day or going through a shitty time, just remember it could have be very, 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 very much worse for you. And the Brazen Bull is something that shows that.